They called me boring at family dinners just because I read books instead of gossiping. Now they watch interviews where Forbes calls me a genius. Hi, my name is Jessica Miller. I'm a 32-year-old entrepreneur based in Austin, Texas. Growing up, I wasn't the loudest person in the room. I wasn't into drama. I liked my books. I loved the quiet comfort of stories, the way words could build worlds and explain things that everyday conversations often skimmed over. But apparently, in my family, that made me weird, and worse, forgettable. It was a feeling that settled deep in my bones, this sense of being transparent, of my passions being trivial. They didn't mean to be cruel, I think, or maybe they did, in that casual way families can sometimes be. They just didn't see me. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, if you've ever felt like your true self was invisible to those who should know you best, then this story is for you. Make sure to like this video, subscribe for more real-life plot twists, and drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from, and if you've ever been the quiet one they shouldn't have ignored. Dallas, Texas. That's where I spent my childhood, surrounded by a family that was, well, loud, very loud. My parents, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins. Everyone always had something to say, a story to tell, an opinion to shout across the dinner table. Family gatherings were a whirlwind of overlapping conversations, booming laughter, and the clatter of cutlery against plates. It was a performance in a way, and everyone had their role. Mine, it seemed, was to be the silent audience, the wallflower against the vibrant wallpaper of their lives. While they were all caught up in the latest family gossip, who was dating whom, who had bought a new car, or arguing passionately about sports or politics, I was usually tucked away in a corner with a book. It wasn't that I didn't want to be part of the conversations. I often tried. I'd listen, wait for a pause, maybe offer a small thought. But my contributions were usually met with a brief, polite nod before the conversation surged on without me, like a fast-moving river parting around a small stone. The topics often felt shallow, repetitive. I found more depth, more understanding of the world, more genuine connection in the pages of the books I devoured. Books didn't interrupt. Books didn't judge my quiet nature. My older sister, Emily, and my younger brother, Kevin, were somewhere in the middle. They'd participate in the family chaos, but also sometimes retreat to their own corners. Emily, with her art. Kevin, with his video games. They found their own ways to cope or engage. But my cousin, Amber was the star. She was 2 years older than me, blonde, bubbly, and effortlessly popular. Whatever Amber did was news. Whatever Amber said was important. Her school achievements, her prom dates, her cheerleading trophies, these were common topics of proud discussion. She soaked up the attention like a sunflower tracking the sun, and the family willingly provided the light. She was everything. I wasn't. Outgoing, vivacious, and seemingly destined for a life as bright and loud as her personality. And then there was me, the quiet one, the one with her nose always in a book. At family gatherings, while Amber would be regaling everyone with animated stories of her latest dates or cheerleading triumphs, her voice clear and confident, I'd be silently turning pages, lost in another world. Sometimes I'd look up and see them all, a vibrant, chattering group, and a pang of loneliness would hit me. It wasn't that I wanted to be Amber exactly, but I wanted to be seen, to be acknowledged for who I was, not just for who I wasn't. I remember one Christmas Eve, everyone was gathered in my grandparents' living room. Amber was showing off a new expensive handbag, a gift from her parents, and everyone was oohing and aahing. I was sitting by the fireplace, reading a collection of classic short stories. My Aunt Carol, Amber's mother, glanced over at me and said, loud enough for several people to hear, "Oh, Jessica, still got your head in the clouds, dear. Don't you want to see Amber's lovely new bag?" I felt a flush creep up my neck. It wasn't just about the bag. It was the implication that my chosen activity was somehow less valuable, less interesting. Another time, at a summer barbecue, my cousins were all playing volleyball, their shouts and laughter filling the backyard. I was sitting under a tree, absorbed in a historical novel. My cousin Mark, who was around my age, called out, "Hey, Jessica, come play. Or are you too busy solving mysteries with Sherlock Holmes?" Everyone laughed. It was meant to be lighthearted, I suppose, but it felt like another reminder that I didn't quite fit in, that my interests were a source of gentle amusement, of polite exclusion. The most memorable instance, the one that still stings a little when I recall it, was at Thanksgiving dinner. I must have been about 15. The table was overflowing with food, a testament to my grandmother's incredible cooking, and the noise level was as high as ever. Uncle Rick, a man known for his booming laugh and even louder opinions, a man who prided himself on his street smarts and practical approach to life, caught sight of me sitting quietly with a thick novel, probably some fantasy epic. "Look at Jessica," he'd bellowed, his voice cutting through the chatter like a foghorn. Everyone turned. "Still reading? When are you going to join the real world, kiddo? You'll never get anywhere in life with your nose in a book. You need to be out there, talking to people, making connections." A wave of heat rushed to my face, hot and prickling. My cheeks burned. Everyone at the table chuckled, some more openly than others. Amber even made a little snorting sound that she quickly tried to cover with a cough, her eyes sparkling with amusement. My parents offered weak smiles, that familiar look of not wanting to cause a scene, of preferring peace over defending their quiet daughter. I just mumbled something incoherent, something about liking the book, and pretended to be engrossed in its pages, even though the words were blurring through the tears welling up in my eyes. I blinked them back fiercely, determined not to cry in front of them. That comment stuck with me. It wasn't just Uncle Rick, it was the general consensus, the unspoken agreement. I was the odd one out, the boring one, the one who wouldn't amount to much because I preferred the company of fictional characters and the wisdom of authors to the constant drama and surface-level interactions of my family. My love for reading wasn't seen as a pursuit of knowledge or a sign of intelligence, but as a social deficiency, a quaint but ultimately useless hobby. Their words, their dismissive glances, their well-intentioned but misguided advice, they all chipped away at me. I started to believe them, at least a little. Maybe I was weird. Maybe I was too introverted. Maybe I was destined to be forgettable, a footnote in the boisterous family saga. But even as those doubts crept in, I couldn't stop reading. Books were my escape, my teachers, my friends when I felt like I had none. They offered refuge when the world felt too loud, too demanding. They were a silent rebellion, a quiet insistence on my own way of being. After graduating from college with a degree in English literature, much to my family's quiet bewilderment, "What are you going to do with that, honey? Teach?" My mother had asked, a worried frown on her face. I felt a bit lost. The loud world my family thrived in, the world Uncle Rick championed, didn't feel like it had a place for me. Or rather, I didn't know how to find my place in it using their rules. So, I did what felt natural. I kept reading, and I moved to Austin, a city known for its creative vibe, hoping for a fresh start. A place where quiet wasn't necessarily seen as a flaw. I started working at a local coffee shop called The Daily Grind to pay the bills. It was a typical studenty place, with mismatched furniture and the constant aroma of roasted beans and pastries. It was quiet in the mornings, and I had downtime between customers where I could steal a few moments with a book. The pay wasn't great, and the work was sometimes monotonous, but it gave me a routine and a sense of independence. My family back in Dallas seemed to think it was a temporary phase. "Still at that coffee shop, dear?" my aunt would ask during our infrequent calls, her tone implying I should be aiming for something more real. But something had shifted in my reading habits. While I still enjoyed fiction, disappearing into novels for hours on end, I found myself increasingly drawn to business books, biographies of successful entrepreneurs, books on marketing, psychology, and leadership, anything that could teach me how the world actually worked, how ideas turned into reality. It was as if a new part of my brain had woken up. I wasn't just escaping anymore. I was searching for tools, for strategies. Inspired by what I was learning and needing an outlet for all these new ideas bubbling up, I started a blog. It was simple, just me sharing my thoughts and detailed reviews of the business books I was reading. I called it Strategic Reads. It was a way to organize my own thoughts, to distill the lessons I was learning, and maybe, just maybe, connect with other quiet bookworms who were also interested in more than just surface-level advice. I poured hours into it after my shifts, writing late into the night, fueled by cheap coffee and a growing sense of purpose. I didn't tell my family about the blog at first. What was the point? They wouldn't understand. They'd probably make fun of me for playing on the internet, or worse, offer well-meaning but completely off-base advice. My dad once suggested, I should write about celebrities if I wanted anyone to read my stuff. So I kept strategic reads my little secret, a small flame of passion that I nurtured in the quiet hours, away from their judgment and expectations. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the blog started to gain traction. People were finding it through search engines or social media links I'd tentatively shared. They were reading my reviews, leaving thoughtful comments, asking questions. Some even reached out via email, thanking me for breaking down complex ideas in an accessible way. I was surprised, then a little excited, then utterly thrilled. It was the first time I felt truly seen for my thoughts, for my intellect. Maybe I wasn't so forgettable after all. Maybe my quiet way of processing the world had value. One day, about 6 months after I started the blog, someone emailed me asking if I offered consulting services. Their name was Sarah, and she was trying to launch a small online retail business. She said she liked my insights on business strategy from a book I'd reviewed on niche marketing and wanted my help developing her own strategy. I was terrified. Me? A consultant? I was just Jessica, the coffee shop girl who read a lot. I almost deleted the email, but then I reread it. She wasn't asking for a world-renowned expert. She was asking for me, for the perspective I offered on my blog. So, I took a deep breath and said yes. It was just a small project, a few hours of my time conducting research, brainstorming ideas, and writing up a report. I charged a ridiculously small amount, mostly because I had no idea what my time was worth, but it felt significant. It was the first money I'd ever earned from my mind, from my reading, and Sarah was happy with the work. She said I'd given her clarity and actionable steps. That small success gave me a little boost of confidence. That small consulting gig led to another, a referral from Sarah, and then another. People seemed to value my quiet, analytical approach. They appreciated that I listened carefully, took the time to truly understand their challenges, and offered thoughtful, well-researched solutions rather than generic advice. I wasn't loud or flashy, but I was thorough. The blog continued to grow, and so did the consulting requests. It reached a point where I was working almost full-time on strategic reads and related projects, while still picking up shifts at the coffee shop. The juggling act was exhausting. I was constantly tired, living on caffeine and adrenaline. There were moments of intense self-doubt. Was I cut out for this? Was I just fooling myself? Sometimes the memory of Uncle Rick's voice would echo in my head. You'll never get anywhere. But then a new comment would appear on the blog, or a client would send a glowing testimonial, and it would refuel my determination. I eventually quit the coffee shop. It was a scary leap, giving up the steady, albeit small, paycheck, but it was also liberating. Strategic Reads, the blog, evolved into a small content agency. I started hiring other freelancers, writers, editors, designers, many of them people like me, introverts who thrived on focused work and clear communication. We built websites, created content strategies, wrote articles and white papers, and helped businesses communicate their ideas effectively. I learned about managing people, about contracts, about finances, mostly from more books, and a lot of trial and error. There were mistakes, setbacks, clients who didn't pay on time, projects that went sideways. But with each challenge, I learned and adapted. Years passed. The content agency grew steadily, organically, through word of mouth, and the reputation we built for quality work. I reinvested the profits, learned about marketing and sales, mostly from more books and online courses, and focused on building a solid, sustainable business. My family, meanwhile, continued their lives in Dallas. I'd visit for holidays, endure the usual teasing about being quiet, the subtle digs about my little online thing. They knew I did something online, that I worked from home, but they never really grasped the scale or the nature of what I was building. In their minds, I was probably still just trying stuff, tinkering away on my computer. Amber had a real job in marketing for a big corporation, which was, of course, much more impressive in their eyes. Then came the idea for the platform. Through my agency work and the continued engagement on my blog, I saw a significant need. Executives and leaders were hungry for high-quality, curated learning experiences, for a community where they could connect with peers, share genuine insights, and grow without the usual corporate fluff or social media noise. I envisioned a global platform for executive development, online courses, workshops, a private community, and premium content from trusted experts. It was a big, ambitious idea, one that required significant investment, a dedicated team, and a whole new level of strategic thinking. But by then, my agency was successful enough to fund the initial stages, and I had built a strong network of talented individuals. The platform, which we named Lead Quietly, a nod to my own journey, launched without much fanfare, almost under the radar. We focused on quality and user experience above all else, but it filled a real need, and word started to spread through executive circles. High-profile CEOs, founders, and thought leaders began joining, sharing their insights, and participating in the discussions. The quality of the content was exceptional. The masterclasses were led by industry giants, and the community felt genuine and supportive. It was everything I had ever wanted in a learning environment. Without a dramatic announcement, without a single boastful post to my family, my quiet reading habit had led me down a path I never could have imagined. I was no longer just reviewing business books. I was building the very kind of platform those books talked about, a place where quiet strength and deep thinking were valued. One crisp fall day, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was practically vibrating with excitement. "Guess what, Jessica? Amber is going to some big tech leadership conference in San Francisco. Isn't that amazing? She's so ambitious." I smiled thinly, a familiar ache in my chest. "That's great, Mom. Good for her." Amber had always gravitated towards the flashy and the trendy. A tech conference seemed right up her alley, a place to network and be seen. She said some really important people will be there, my mother continued, oblivious to my internal sigh. "All the big names. Maybe she'll even meet someone famous, make some important connections for her career." I made polite, encouraging noises and ended the call, the familiar feeling of being the less exciting, less newsworthy sibling washing over me. It was a feeling I thought I had outgrown, but it still had the power to sting. Later that week, I packed my own suitcase and flew to San Francisco myself. My company, Led Quietly, was a major sponsor of the very same tech leadership conference Amber was attending. I was also scheduled to give the keynote speech on the final day, a fact I hadn't shared with my family. It wasn't about keeping secrets. It was just that explaining what I did, the scale of it, had always felt complicated and, frankly, unappreciated. The conference was buzzing with energy. Thousands of people, executives, entrepreneurs, investors, filled the massive convention center. I spent the first few days in meetings with my team, connecting with existing and potential clients, and attending various sessions to keep my finger on the pulse of the industry. I even caught a few glimpses of Amber across crowded halls. She was always surrounded by a group of people, laughing loudly, animatedly gesturing, working the room with the kind of effortless confidence I'd always envied and never possessed. She didn't see me, or if she did, she didn't recognize me in my more professional conference attire. I didn't make an effort to approach her. We lived in different worlds, even when we were physically in the same city. Then came the final day of the conference. The keynote speech was scheduled for after lunch, the closing highlight of the 3-day event. The main auditorium was vast, already filling up. I stood backstage, looking out through a crack in the curtains, feeling a familiar mix of nerves and focused excitement. This was a big audience, an influential one. The organizer's voice, amplified by the sound system, boomed through the auditorium as he began the introduction. He spoke about the changing landscape of leadership, the need for authenticity and continuous learning. Then he started listing my accomplishments: the successful content agency, the rapidly growing executive development platform, Lead Quietly, its global reach, the innovative approach, the recent feature in Fortune magazine that had profiled our impact. As he announced my name, "Please welcome the founder and CEO of Lead Quietly, Jessica Miller." A wave of applause erupted. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my dress, and walked onto the stage, into the bright lights. The lights were blinding, for a moment, and then the audience stretched out before me, a sea of faces. And then I saw her, sitting about halfway back, in the middle of a row, her mouth slightly agape, her eyes wide, was Amber. Her usual confident, slightly smug demeanor was completely gone, replaced by an expression of utter shock and disbelief. As I began my speech, talking about the power of quiet leadership and the importance of substance over style, I could see her nudging the person next to her, whispering something urgently and pointing towards the stage, then back at the program. In her lap, her face was pale, Over the next hour, I spoke about my journey, not in a bragging way, but as an illustration of the principles I believed in. I talked about the importance of continuous learning, the power of quiet focus in a noisy world, and how true influence often comes from depth of understanding rather than volume of voice. I shared insights gleaned from countless books, yes, but also from the very real, often messy lessons I had learned building my business from a simple blog in my tiny apartment to a global platform. I spoke about embracing introverted strengths, in leadership, about creating value, and about the unexpected paths that genuine passion can lead you down. After my speech, there was a moment of silence, and then a standing ovation. It was overwhelming. People lined up to ask questions, to connect, to congratulate me. I saw Amber standing awkwardly at the edge of the crowd, near the exit, looking lost and a little pale. She didn't approach me then. Later that evening, as I was unwinding in my hotel room, my phone buzzed. It was a text message from her. "Jessica, was that really you on stage today? Keynote speaker?" I replied simply, "Yes, Amber, it was me. Hope you enjoyed the conference." The next day, my phone didn't stop buzzing. My parents called first, their voices a mixture of confusion and pride. "Jessica, honey, we saw an article online about that conference Amber was at. It said you were the main speaker, that you own that big company, led quietly, the one Fortune wrote about." My mother sounded breathless. Then came the calls from my aunts, my uncles, even Uncle Rick. He sounded gruff, but there was a different tone in his voice, something I hadn't heard before. "Well, I'll be," he'd said. "That reading stuff. Guess it wasn't such a waste of time after all, huh, kiddo?" They had seen the news, the articles, the social media posts about the keynote speaker. Photos of me on stage were circulating. They were finally connecting the dots. The scattered pieces of information they'd had about my online work suddenly forming a picture they hadn't expected. The quiet bookworm they had teased and dismissed had built something massive, something undeniable, something that even they, in their world of tangible achievements, had to acknowledge as significant. A few weeks later, there was a birthday dinner for one of my younger cousins, Maya, in Houston. I almost didn't go. The thought of facing my entire extended family after the conference revelations felt strange, maybe even a little uncomfortable. I wasn't sure what to expect. Would they be different? Would I be different around them? But my mother insisted, her voice filled with a new kind of eagerness. "Everyone's so excited to see you, Jessica. They're all talking about your success." So, with some trepidation, I booked a flight. As I walked into the crowded private dining room of the restaurant, the usual boisterous chatter seemed to die down for a moment. Heads turned. All eyes were on me. It was a different kind of attention than I was used to from my family. There was no teasing in their eyes, no polite dismissal. Instead, I saw a newfound respect in their gazes, mixed with a hint of awe. It felt strange, like walking into a familiar room where all the furniture had been rearranged. The evening progressed, but it was different. Awkwardly so at first. People kept glancing at me. Conversations that started would trail off when I approached. My Uncle Rick, usually the loudest person at any gathering, was noticeably subdued, occasionally looking at me with a puzzled expression. Amber was there, quiet for once, picking at her food and avoiding my gaze initially. My parents, however, were beaming, subtly trying to steer conversations towards my achievements. Then, as I was getting a glass of water from the bar area, I overheard a snippet of a conversation between two of my aunts, Aunt Carol and Aunt Susan. "Remember when she just read all the time?" Aunt Carol said, her voice a hushed whisper, but clear, enough for me to hear. "We all thought she was so quiet, a bit of an oddball, bless her heart." The other Aunt Susan chuckled softly. "Well, her quiet reading seems to have paid off, hasn't it? Who would have thought? Jessica, of all people." A small, genuine smile touched my lips. It wasn't a smug smile, but one of quiet acknowledgement. They were finally beginning to understand, even if it was only through the lens of worldly success. I walked back to the main table, where a lull had fallen in the conversation. I picked up my water glass. "Yes?" I said, my voice clear and steady, not loud, but carrying in the suddenly quiet room. "You're right. I did spend a lot of time reading, and yes, I was always the quiet one." I paused, meeting the eyes of each family member in turn. My parents, whose faces were a mixture of pride and perhaps a little regret for the past. My siblings, Emily and Kevin, who were looking at me with open admiration, Amber, who finally met my gaze, a complex emotion in her eyes, surprise, maybe a touch of envy, but also a dawning respect, and Uncle Rick, who looked down at his plate. "And I want to thank you all," I continued, the words coming easily now. "Thank you for all the years of underestimation. Thank you for calling me boring, and for thinking I was forgettable." A few uncomfortable coughs broke the silence, because while you were all busy with your very important conversations and your very loud lives, you gave me something invaluable. You gave me the time and the quiet to observe, to learn, to think, and ultimately, to build an empire. A stunned silence filled the room. For a moment, no one moved. Then slowly, my father started to clap. Then my mother joined in, her eyes shining. Soon, a few others followed, a hesitant, then more confident applause. My parents looked incredibly proud, a little teary-eyed. Amber offered a small, hesitant smile, then looked down. Even Uncle Rick gave me a slow, deliberate nod of acknowledgement, a grudging respect in his eyes. The rest of Naya, the evening was different. The awkwardness eased, replaced by a genuine curiosity. People asked me about my work, about Led Quietly, not with the polite disinterest of before, but with real interest. They wanted to know about the books I recommended, the strategies I used, the challenges I overcame in building my company. My cousins, who had once teased me for being a bookworm, now asked for career advice. Amber eventually came over and quietly congratulated me, admitting she had no idea. "It's really incredible, Jessica," she said, and for the first time, I felt like she was seeing me, the real me. It wasn't a magic fix. Decades of family dynamics don't change in one evening, but it was a start, a shift. They were seeing me, finally, not as the quiet, forgettable bookworm, but as the person I had become, the person I had quietly, diligently built myself to be. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or dramatic. It's strategic, earned, and absolutely undeniable. My family's underestimation, their dismissive words, their casual disregard, they didn't break me. In a strange way, they fueled me. They gave me the space and the quiet I needed to learn, to grow, and to build something extraordinary, on my own terms. My success wasn't about proving them wrong in an aggressive way. It was about proving myself right, about honoring the quiet passions they couldn't understand. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever been laughed at, ignored, called too quiet, or made to feel that your passions were insignificant, know that your silence doesn't mean insignificance. Your focus, your dedication, your inner world, these are your strengths. Don't let anyone make you feel small for them. The world needs quiet thinkers, deep learners, and determined builders just as much as it needs the loud voices. Like this video if you've ever been underestimated and found your own way to shine. Subscribe for more real-life stories of unexpected triumphs and quiet resilience. And share your own glow-up moment in the comments below. I want to hear how you proved the doubters wrong, how you turned your quiet passions into undeniable success. Someone out there needs your story. Let them know they're not alone.